Welcome to another special edition of Daily Airline News. I'm Jeffrey Thomas, and again, we're focusing on the search for MH370, and we have exciting news that yesterday's new evidence question mark that we alerted to has today been confirmed. Now, before we go into that, of course, introducing Richard Godfrey, the UK aerospace engineer who has worked with Whisper technology, perfected it to find a new location for MH370. So welcome, Richard, and perhaps you can talk us to the where MH370 search ship is today.
Yeah, thank you, Jeffrey. Armada 7806 has arrived in Australia. It's arrived at a marine complex in Henderson, about 23 kilometers south of Perth, which is part of the Fremantle Port Authority. It's arrived ahead of schedule. It was originally planned to arrive tomorrow morning, but it's already there. And the plan originally was to depart on the 6th of March at 7 a.m. We'll see if that remains so. They obviously have logistics scheduled for refueling and provisioning and possible crew change. So I don't expect them to change that scheduled departure. And that will mean that Armada 7806 will be back out in the MH370 search area around about the 11th of March.
Great. Now, as I alluded to in the intro, the possible new evidence you unveiled yesterday has now been confirmed, and we can give viewers a lot more detail about it. Perhaps you can talk us through it, Richard.
Yes, Captain Martin Smith was the pilot of a flight called EK 407 from Melbourne to Dubai on the night of the 7th of March 2014. And he was crossing the Indian Ocean. It's usually a relatively quiet period for pilots. But he then observed the navigation lights of an aircraft, and it didn't have its transponder on, and there was no warnings. An aircraft has a traffic collision avoidance system, TCAS, and the TCAS didn't show any traffic alert, or called a TA for pilot language, or an RA, which is a resolution advisory. So if the other aircraft comes too close, they get an advisory, turn left, turn right, climb, descend, to avoid a potential collision. So this obviously alerted the pilot. He immediately contacted air traffic control. At this point, he's still in the Melbourne flight information region and the Australian oceanic area. He queried this aircraft, and they said, "We have no record of any other aircraft in your area." And they maintained that the Emirates aircraft had a clearance called a block clearance to be between flight level 370, 37,000 feet, and flight level 390, 39,000 feet. And he could climb as the aircraft got lighter, as fuel was used, at his discretion. So when you get a block clearance, that implies for a pilot there's no other aircraft in that airspace at that time. So it's an interesting story, and we are going to. We've asked already Emirates for their ACARS position reports for this flight, and then I'm going to, together with Martin Smith, write a report in the coming days, and when we gather all of this evidence together, and show the viewers exactly what was going on during this observation.
This really does confirm MH370 was going south, and it really does confirm that it was on the Whisper track that you've identified.
Yes, we wrote a report back on the 31st of August 2023. Um, Professor Simon Maskell, Dr. Hannes Coetzee, and myself. And in that report, on page 20 from memory, we show MH370 close to a waypoint called a Pip-Off. We can show that page on the screen.
Hmm.
And the Emirates flight, on its flight plan, was tracking towards another waypoint close by called Mutmi. And there are three flight routes that meet in this area, from flights from Australia to the Middle East, and flights from Asia to South Africa. And so it's a bit of a crossing point in the middle of the Indian Ocean for various flight routes. And so we have quite some detailed information on this observation, and as you say, it confirms that MH370 did fly south into the Indian Ocean. It confirms the Whisper tracking matches the observation by an airline captain.
When you think about it, in a chilling thought, there could have been a mid-air collision.
It is indeed, and what MH370, the pilot in command of that flight, um, and we still don't have confirmed evidence of the identity of that pilot, but uh, he was definitely taking some risks.
Mm.
My assumption is that he would have known the risks and known the flight levels and assumed an aircraft in the Indian Ocean crossing from Australia to the Middle East would either be at flight level 360 or later after a step climb at flight level 380. So if he flew at an odd altitude like 36,500 feet or 37,500 feet, that would have been one measure to avoid a collision.
Yeah. So we've had a tremendous reaction to the story, which is understandable. New evidence on MH370, which has resulted in a flood of questions, which is great. Very engaging questions we've had, and one of the ones that seems to have been repeated many times was, why has it taken so long, 11 years, for this to come out? But you've got a good story on that.
It's a very long story. I mean, obviously, the pilot immediately contacted air traffic control. When he landed, he wrote an incident report, and that goes to the airline's safety department. An incident during the flight, you could term it a near miss, but at least it was an unidentified aircraft crossing the airspace that air traffic control had designated for this Emirates flight. Um, The investigation at the time said there was no official flight plan. Well, of course, MH370 diverted from its official flight plan, so there wouldn't have been a flight plan in the database for another aircraft. And the other issue is that there was no positive identification. The navigation lights were lit, but the tail logo lighting to identify what airline this unidentified aircraft was not lit up. That's normally only lit when an aircraft is landing or departing or on the ground. So without a positive identification, there was no formal complaint against another airline or another pilot back then.
Mm.
Since then, there have been many attempts to analyze the story. I had a comment on my website from Dr. Robert Westphal, who discussed this possibility of interaction with EK407 with Mike Exner and Don Thompson of the Independent Group back in several years ago. But the observation from a pilot was not available to them at that point. There's been the pilot contacted Peter Hornfeld, the mentor pilot, who has a YouTube channel, and he told Martin Smith to contact me, basically, and here we are. So we are the first people to actually publish anything on this observation, but it unfortunately has taken 11 years. You could ask, for example, why the Malaysian accident investigation or the criminal investigation that they conducted never bothered to ask airlines that travel across the Indian Ocean whether there was any incident reported by any of their pilots. But they obviously didn't do that at the time.
Mind you, the Malaysian report is full of mistakes and some very unusual assumptions. I don't think they really had their heart in that report somehow or other. But one of the things I presume is that Captain Martin Smith saw Mentor Pilot's excellent show covering MH370 and Whisper, and that's why he's contacted him to seek his help, and then obviously with your help to try and connect the dots, which of course now we have, or now you have, which is fantastic. So that Mentor Pilot program is an excellent one, and there's a link below in the description for any of you viewers who'd like to have a look at that report by Mentor Pilot. There's another question that's come up, and this was asked, and in fact I asked this question way back in 2014. Why didn't John pick up MH370?
Yeah, the Australian Jawn is an over-the-horizon radar with a tremendous capability. A friend of mine, Duncan Steele, actually worked on Jawn and at one point, and he recounts how they could watch aircraft taking off and landing in Changi Airport in Singapore. So the system is well capable of having detected MH370 over the Indian Ocean. There was an official report at one point by the Australian authorities that Jawn was actually not operational on that evening. They were doing some maintenance on the system or upgrading the software. So that is a very unfortunate coincidence because Otherwise, we may have found out a lot sooner about the actual path of MH370 into the Indian Ocean.
Mhm. Now, another question that's come up, or a statement, I should say, and it simply says radio amateurs invented whisper, not you. And of course, I know you're going to answer this question, obviously, but we've never said you invented it. We've said you have perfected and developed a tracking system based on it. But can you talk to that, Richard?
Yeah, well, I am immensely grateful to the radio amateurs who run this WhisperNet database. The Whisper protocol was invented by Joe Taylor, a former professor and a Nobel Prize winner. He used protocols like this for tracking the universe and picking up signals over literally billions of kilometers from far away in the universe and tracking how different stars and systems evolve. And the purpose for the Whisper protocol for radio amateurs was to check the propagation of their radio waves.
Mm.
In fact, Joe Taylor and several other radio amateurs said it was never intended to detect and track aircraft. And in fact, some say it can't work to detect or track aircraft. So what I claim is, together with Dr. Robert Westphal, who first had this idea, and together with Professor Simon Maskell and Dr. Hannes Coetzee, that we have developed a system for detecting and tracking aircraft using the Whisper data. And when I refer to the Whisper technology that we're using, I refer to the aircraft detection and tracking, not the propagation database per se, which goes back to 2008. And we only started our research 4 years ago.
Indeed, and we've done a special episode on Whisper, explaining Whisper. If again, there'll be a link below for any of you viewers who want to get more into it. And Richard actually demonstrated and did a live demonstration of exactly the processes that are involved. And there are a multitude of processes. A huge amount of software has gone into this. So have a look at it, and you'll appreciate the depth of research that's gone into all of this. Now, and also we have mentioned many times that Richard's work has been peer reviewed. Nonetheless, some folks have asked, has it been peer reviewed? So, Richard, perhaps you can go into more detail about who has peer reviewed Whisper.
Yeah, there are a number of people who have taken up our offer uh, over the years to get a copy of all of the software and all of the data we use and to put it in their own system. There is a university in Australia, for example, who actually, as part of their third year physics course, use the Whisper software as a part of the course and get the students to develop their own Whisper tracking system. The main academics who are involved is from the Liverpool University, a large team there under Professor Simon Maskell. And Professor Simon Maskell is also in contact with other academics. There are a number from different universities in Finland, in Sweden, in America, in Australia. And Simon Maskell is also in contact with the DSTG in Australia, the Department of Science Technology Group, and they're all reviewing and advising on Whisper. Um, Simon Maskell is going to be publishing a series of papers in an academic journal, the IEEE journal, um, and that will allow a wider academic review from a larger number of people. Um, and of course, all the time, the military are already using this technology.
Mm.
And there are programs currently in Europe wide, which Dr. Hannes Coetzee is involved with. And I'm not allowed to say too much about those programs.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't the Finnish Air Force do something with this some years ago, tracking a flight from Helsinki to Riyadh?
They produced a paper, which is a NATO
Mm.
paper by uh, the Finnish Air Force. From memory, that was back in 2006, where they
Mm.
proposed the idea of using amateur radio signals as a resource to illuminate and detect and track aircraft like a kind of radar system or a passive radar system. They ran some experiments and were quite successful and put forward the idea that it could be used as a kind of an early warning system and would be, um, they were thinking of recompensing all the radio amateurs who supplied data to their program by giving them the results in near real time. So,
Mm.
yeah, that idea is not new.
No. So, another question from a couple of people. Has the IG group peer reviewed Whisper technology?
Yeah, yes, they have, and they published a paper. They came to the conclusion that Whisper cannot be used to detect and track aircraft. They make their argument that the distances are too long, the power levels of the transmissions are too weak, and there are too many other aircraft flying around in the world at any one time, and to distinguish the aircraft that you want from all the other ones is an impossible task. So they essentially concluded Whisper can be dismissed.
Well, we'll see, won't we? It's, I mean,
Uh,
you've
uh,
answered.
Needless to say, I have a different view, but
Yeah.
that is that
Yes.
I respect their opinion.
Yes, look, indeed, we respect their opinion. We do definitely have a different view, particularly as you have said, the Whisper technology was, if you like, to track aircraft was first pioneered by NATO, and they proved it could be done. And then, of
Yeah,
course, all this work has been peer reviewed by multiple academics, universities, and really it is the basis. It is the basis of the credible new evidence that Ocean Infinity is out there looking for MH370 again. So there's a lot of folks that say, yes, you are right. And we and I believe that. And I've been working with you now, what, 4 years? And we started as the adjudicator for those blind tests. And I was very honored that you chose us to adjudicate those blind tests, what, three or 4 years ago now. And they're all very successful.
yes. I'd like to remind viewers that this process of review and then acceptance of a new scientific theory can take several years. I
Mm,
think most of us have had inoculations against various diseases at some point. And when inoculations were first brought in, for 7 years, the whole medical profession said it couldn't work.
that's right.
And the poor chap who invented it was hounded out
Mm.
of the medical society. Uh, but 7 years later, it became widespread to inoculate, and meanwhile, millions of people who might have suffered from diseases like polio or typhus or diphtheria have received inoculations and been saved.
In fact, I did some research on that very subject during COVID, and I was writing some articles up about vaccinations. And since the first one that was invented, there's now, I think, about 29 diseases that have been eradicated or controlled through vaccinations. So a wonderful piece of scientific medical science. So yeah. So, look, that brings us to a conclusion. Richard, thank you again for your research. Very exciting with this confirmation of the evidence that we presented yesterday with the Emirates captain, Captain Martin Smith. And thank you again for your research and work you've done for this episode. Viewers, please subscribe to us. Please like us. Please leave us more comments and do tune in tomorrow for another special edition of Daily Airline News covering the search for MH370. And once again, Richard, thank you for your time.
You're welcome.